The first one, currently working on a non-clinical Cochrane review where we look at the effects of training on knowledge and skill levels of the participants. Nobody is really able to define what is a minimally important effect here. So how do you set the thresholds for imprecision then? Is it okay to use the 0.75 and 1.25 thresholds as a rule of thumb?
That's a good question, and I think given the complexity of systematic review questions nowadays, we're going to see a lot more of this, where it's very difficult to judge what is minimally important here. I know I've given some blanket rules in this presentation, but I'm not generally a fan of blanket rules myself. I mean, all I can really advise is that you have people on your review team that are context experts in that particular field, and you just have to go with a threshold that you see fit, really, based on literature, based on what guideline panels might say as well. It's an important point to note that I've not said anywhere in this presentation, and it's not really said in the actual paper for the grade guidance, that these thresholds have to be set from a priori stage. Like that they're not stated in a pre-published protocol, for example. I don't believe that should be the expectations for authors moving ahead, is that you have to set a threshold at your protocol and stick to that. There are certain cases where thresholds are set before a review is conducted. These are normally from when reviews have been commissioned by a guideline panel, and they would talk about a threshold and come to agreement on one, and then you should judge your imprecision ratings based on the threshold set by a guideline panel. But it's difficult to give a hard and fast rule to this, and I know it's probably an answer that people don't want, but you just have to trust your own instincts, really, and make sure. And this is why having a diverse review team is important, is having those content experts in the review team.
Okay, so the second question is quite similar. I'm working on a review on the effect of supplements on weight gain in malnourished children. Is it okay to use, again, the 0.75 and 1.25 thresholds as a rule of thumb? So I guess this is quite similar to the previous one.
I would add to this that obviously this new guidance of using a minimally contextualized approach is preferred, but there are going to be cases where your confidence intervals are so wide, and this is very typical in some fields because of low event rates, or just you naturally get very high variation in real life, that you probably don't need thresholds in a lot of cases to decide to downgrade.
Okay, so Joanna asks if we can post the article reference once more. I think Rachel posted the article, so we're okay. And there's an additional comment that says that we don't have any content experts in the review team. So, and they say that they don't know either what is the how we can define this threshold. So I guess maybe check the literature might be a good advice here. I don't know, Leslie, what's the option here? So if clinicians do not have an answer, maybe literature can give an answer on this one. Okay, and question, are there available lists of MIDs by specialty, at least for critical outcomes, for example, mortality? It would be great if lists of MIDs could be posted on the Cochrane website. So are there any list of this MIDs?
I'm not aware of any, but if
Yeah.
anyone is, then yeah, please do share it. Because yeah, that would be particularly handy as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, these things are context dependent. And not so much for mortality, because I think mortality is so clear cut that and sort of any benefit in mortality can be considered clinically important. But for the cases when you're looking at a prevalence or incidence of a disease, there are things you might have to take into account here with the prevalence, the baseline prevalence of that disease, or how rare it is, or other environmental contexts as well. And yeah, I think that sort of links with another question that someone had about when would you use the partially contextualized approach instead of minimal. So yeah, in the Great Guidance paper, they both talk about what is partially contextualized and fully contextualized. So partially contextualized approach is when authors rate their certainty that a true effect falls within the range that represents a trivial, small, moderate, and large effects for one outcome at a time. And then there is also the case of a fully contextualized approach, which I don't believe you would use in a systematic review setting normally. They typically might be used in guidelines where you simultaneously consider multiple outcomes at that time, and you're trading off desirable versus undesirable health effects of an intervention. And then you set a decision threshold above which they would recommend in favor of intervention, or below what they would recommend against it. So for partially contextualized approach, I think this is not necessarily useful for most cases for systematic review. I think where it is useful is, like I mentioned before, when you have a mixture of disease thresholds and prevalence from different settings. So I always try and leeway this into every Cochrane talk I give, but my background's in medical entomology, so it's looking at diseases that are spread by insects, and that's why I'm particularly keen on drawing from examples of malaria reviews. But for malaria, the transmission dynamics for malaria is so variable from country to country. So you're not only thinking about human behavior, but you're also thinking about the behavior of the mosquito species that spreads malaria. And that leads to so many different background or baseline prevalence of malaria, and also so many different malaria causing parasites in particular settings. So that might be one good example where you might consider using a partially contextualized approach, where you set thresholds for what you would consider minimal, and also a large magnitude of effect. But I think for most systematic review authors, and for most questions that are addressed in systematic reviews, using a minimally important difference is fine.
Great, thanks for the answer, Leslie. Um, Matteo asks whether all new Cochrane protocols always specify MIDs for all outcomes.
No, no. Um, I wouldn't advise on this either, for several reasons. Um, I think apart from risk bias to having set rules for grade a priori, puts you in a difficult position moving forward if you get wildly different results to what you expected. I don't believe even the grade working group suggests to do this. There are cases where protocols do specify minimally important differences. I've not seen one myself, but when you're working alongside a guideline panel, for example, they might set um, thresholds for you. So you should take that into account.
We also have a question from Alexandra. She asks, when would you use the partially contextualized approach instead of the MID?
That was one that I just answered earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I also have a question, Leslie. I was wondering about these large effects for the OIS. When do you consider an effect large? I mean, I'm not quite sure. When do we think that actually an effect estimate is considered large?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think there are some examples given in the guidance paper. I didn't want to go into too much detail for this presentation here, purely because I think that the focus should be on this minimally contextualized approach. I guess imprecision is one of those things. It's difficult because you think there should be quite objective decisions made with imprecision because it's one of the more quantitative grade domains, let's say, compared to risk or bias or something. But yeah, it's quite hard. And I was struggling to find an example myself as well from reviews where you have a large relative effect, but your confidence intervals don't cross any threshold. So I think this is why considering OIS is now reserved for very rare cases. And to be honest, previously, I think from my own experience and from experience of helping authors, I think few authors actually did consider the optimal information size anyway, because normally you do get enough information from just looking at the width of confidence intervals and in the cases that optimal information sizes is considered, most of the time I see it is when you have very obvious underpowering already, like the example I gave with with this forest plot where you've only got 20 events combined total, but you've got 2,300 and something sample size. So here's it's very clear cut that is underpowered.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie. So I don't know if there are any other questions. Okay, so we have another one. How much is baseline risk an issue in the rating of imprecision when we use risk reduction? Is this a problem we should consider?
Baseline risk. So you might be better suited to answer this one, Aphrodite, but from my understanding is because we're now looking at anticipated absolute effects rather than relative effects with these plots. Baseline risk is taken into account for that. So as a sample here, when we talk about this minimally important difference for benefit is 1%. That's sorry, 0.5%. So there's a 0.5% reduction in death compared to the baseline risk.
Okay. Thank you, Leslie. Is there the risk that skipping reporting MIDs in the protocol might lead to cherry picking the MIDs when we have the CIs, for example, post hoc?
Yes, definitely. I think that's again that's why with any systematic review, we should be able to justify our decisions and be transparent about them. So if you can source references for why you've come up with that minimally important difference, then yeah, that would really strengthen your decision and having that in your review and quoting that when you're doing those footnotes in your summary of findings tables.